Hello students, welcome to the Edupedia World videos. Today we are going to start with another topic, that is the structure of the cell. Typically if we see the different parts of the cell, a cell can be divided into three parts: a central nucleus, the cytoplasm and the outer coverings. Now this outer covering is a very important part of the cell, as this outer covering not only protects the cell, but it also marks the boundary of the cell in the similar manner as our house marks our boundary. We can say this is our region, where no trespasser can enter without our permission. That is the function of the outer covering. It not only maintains the entry and exit of the cell, but it also helps to maintain the identity of the cell. These outer coverings can be of two types: the cell wall and the cell membrane. Now regarding the cell wall, it is present in only few types of cells, which we are going to discuss later, but cell membrane is a universal character which are found in almost all the types of cell which have their own independent existence. This cell wall is a very important part as it protects the cell from the harsh conditions of the environment. If we try to give a precise definition of the cell wall, it is a rigid, a semi-elastic, a supportive and a protective covering which is present in the plant cells, fungi, some of the protists and the prokaryotes. Now in all the four categories, that is plant cells, fungi, protists, prokaryotes, it is of different types and the composition varies. Let's have a look at the composition. If we talk about the plants, it is made up of a carbohydrate, a polysaccharide which is made up of many monosaccharides, that is cellulose. This cellulose, you can say, it occurs in plenty in the environment because all the plants are made up of millions of cells and each of the cell has the cellulose. If we talk about a fungus, it is made up of the fungus cellulose which is known as a chitin. And if I talk about a bacteria, it is again made up of a complex which is the peptidoglycan. Sometimes extra coverings are also found outside the cell wall to give it extra rigidity or for the extra support, like the lignin for strength, suberin for the impermeability, that is, it does not allow any of the material to easily enter into the cell, and the cutin which provides a surface coating so that the cells do not variegate very easily. Now let's have a look how does the cell wall looks like. If we see the structure of the cell wall, it is basically made up of two layers, that is the primary cell wall and the secondary cell wall. Now there is a middle lamella which is also present, which acts like a cementing material. This cementing material acts in the similar way as if we take the example of a wall. If we just place the bricks on one top of the other, it is not going to provide that extra strength until and unless we put something to like stick the bricks together. Similar is the meaning, the function of the middle lamella. It acts like a cementing material which gives the extra strength to the cell wall. This middle lamella, it is made up of pectin, calcium and magnesium pectate. Now, as we mentioned earlier, the cell wall is impermeable in nature. So how do the cells communicate with each other, or how do the things pass through each other? Now, the cells in this cell wall have a pore-like structures that is known as plasmodesmata. See, these type of structures which help in the entry and exit of the materials from one cell to another. These plasmodesmatas act as a connection and a source of communication between the two cells. Because of the presence of the cell wall, the plant cells shows an extra feature which is also known as the plasmolysis. Now what is plasmolysis? If we place a plant cell in a hypertonic solution, slowly you are going to notice that the protoplasm starts shrinking, and it shrinks to such an extent that it moves away from the cell wall. This phenomenon, it is known as the plasmolysis, and it can be easily seen if we take the example of a royo leaf and place it in a hypertonic solution. Now, having seen the structure of the cell wall, let us discuss what are the functions of the cell wall. It provides the shape to the cell. It gives the extra strength to the cell. It also gives the protection to the cell from the harsh conditions of the atmosphere. It helps to a certain extent in the growth of the cell, as it helps in the entry and exit of the materials that are required for the growth. It helps in endoosmosis, that is the moving in of the materials, and it helps to protect the cell from the various environmental variations. Now this was the first outer covering. Now let's move on to the cell membrane. First of all, the definition of the cell membrane. It is the outermost elastic covering which protects the cell and separates its content from the external environment. Now the plant cells have the cell wall which gives them the extra strength. But in case of the animal cell, the cell membrane is the outermost covering which protects the cell. If we see the structure of the cell membrane, typically a cell membrane is made up of the following things. It is made up of the lipids, the proteins and the carbohydrates. Now first, the lipids. The lipids, they are made up of the two parts, that is the head and the tail part. The hydrophilic, that is the water loving part, and the hydrophobic, that is the water repelling part. Regarding the proteins, they act like a channels which helps in the entry and exit of the materials. Some of the carbohydrates are also found attached to these phospholipids and the proteins. Now let's see what are the functions of the cell membrane. The cell membrane is also known as the plasma membrane. It provides a shape to the cell. Without it, the shape of the cell cannot be defined, as the boundaries will not be defined and the protoplasm will keep flowing. So it provides a particular shape. It acts like a mechanical barrier between the two cells. It is selectively permeable. Now what is selectively permeable? It allows only selected materials to pass through and through the membrane. It helps in endocytosis. This word endocytosis is made up of two words. Endo means inside. Cyto word is derived from the cell. So whatever things are coming inside the cell are seen by the plasma membrane or are controlled by the plasma membrane. It also helps in the recognition of the cell, as it is believed that the cell membrane, it has certain types of receptors on it, which helps in the recognition of the cell during the signaling process, which we are going to study in the higher sections. It also helps in the flow of information between the cells. What are the things required? What are the things that are going to move out of the cell? That is maintained by the plasma membrane. It helps in the osmosis. Now what is osmosis? We are going to deal now in the coming presentation. The cell continuity, that the cell is not excluded. It helps in the communication of the cell, and it gives a specialization to the cell. It makes a cell very special, as it helps to maintain the identity of the cell. Now, seeing to the structure and functions of the cell, let us discuss about the transport across the membrane. Now, as earlier I told you that the membrane is selectively permeable, that is, it allows certain movements across the membrane. Now, the membrane, on the basis of like this transport, it can be of various types. First of all, a membrane can be permeable. That is, if the substances, both solute and solvent, they can pass easily across the membrane. Impermeable, that is, the substances cannot at all pass through the membrane. Semi-permeable, that is, it allows the solvent in which the things are dissolved, the solvent, to pass across the membrane but not the solute. And selectively permeable, if it allows the passage of the solvent and certain selected solutes, then it is known as the selectively permeable membrane. Now there are four types of membrane which are present. Most of the membranes, they are selectively permeable membranes, as it not only allows the movement of certain solutes and the solvent, but it makes it a very particular thing that whatever things are coming inside and whatever things are moving outside the cell are of certain value. Now this transport across the membrane can be divided on the basis of energy as the passive transport and the active transport. The passive transport can again be divided as the diffusion and the osmosis. Now what is the difference between the passive and the active transport? The active transport is a type of transport which requires energy. But a passive transport is based upon the concentration, and it is always from the higher concentration to the lower concentration. Now, diffusion and osmosis are the two types of passive transport. First, let us discuss about what is diffusion. Diffusion, as we can say, it is the movement of the substances from the region of its higher concentration to the region of its lower concentration, so that the concentration becomes equal. The best example of diffusion is that if I open a perfume bottle at the corner of a room, I can smell the perfume at the other corner also. That is the diffusion of the gases in the gases present in the room. Similarly, if I light an agarbatti, an incense stick, at one room and I can smell the perfume in the next room also, this is also a best example of diffusion. Let us discuss a brief activity of diffusion. If we add a drop of ink in water, after a while we are going to see that the ink is spread evenly throughout the container. This is the example of diffusion. See, the concentration is becoming equal in each and every part, and this is the best example of diffusion. Now, the second type of passive transport is osmosis. The diffusion of water or solvent from a region of higher concentration to a region of lower concentration, but through a semi-permeable membrane. Now this is the basic difference between osmosis and diffusion, that a membrane is involved in this type of transport. What is the importance of osmosis to the plants? Why we are studying it in the cell? What is the importance? First of all, osmosis is the method by which the water is transported from one cell to another. See, for example, if one cell is having much content of water and the other one is deficient in water, the cell which is having high concentration is going to give the water to the other cell. This is the best example of osmosis. Secondly, when we put the water in the plants, we just put it in the roots. Now what this water does, the roots which are deficient in water, they do not have that much of water. So what they do, they absorb the water from the external environment, and similarly the cells which have more water, they give the water to the other cells. Thirdly, it also helps in the absorption of fresh water by the unicellular organisms. The organisms which are made up of only one cell, if they require water, it also helps in the absorption. This osmosis also helps in the absorption of water. And lastly, a very important phenomenon of nature, that is transpiration. Now transpiration, what is transpiration? It is just a loss of water in the form of vapor. The guard cells are present outside the stomatal pores. The closing and the opening of these guard cells are guarded by the osmosis. So this is such an important phenomenon for the plants as well as the other cells. Based upon the osmosis, the solutions can be divided into three categories now. First is a hypotonic solution, second is the isotonic solution, and third is the hypertonic solution. If we try to define each of these solutions, first we will start with the hypotonic solution. As you can see in the figure, the osmotic concentration of the solution is lower than the other solution. If we consider two solutions like the blue one and the yellow one, we can see that the blue one has a lower concentration. This is the hypotonic solution. In case of hypertonic solution, the solution which has higher concentration compared to the other solution. In this example, the blue one is having more concentration as compared to the yellow one. But if we consider the isotonic solution, what we are going to see that the molecules are equally dispersed in both the solutions. That is, the osmotic concentration of both the solutions are equal. So, if we place two solutions, one is hypotonic and the other one is hypertonic. If there are two solutions of different concentration and they are separated by a semi-permeable membrane, they will tend to balance the unequal concentrations, and for this the movement will always be from the hypotonic solution, which is having more solvent content, towards the hypertonic solution, which is having less solvent and more solute content. Now, discussing about the various types of solutions, let us move towards the types of osmosis. Osmosis can be divided into two parts, that is endoosmosis and exoosmosis. Endoosmosis is the movement of the material from outside the cell towards inside of the cell, and exoosmosis is the material of the solvent from inside towards outer side of the cell. This definition will more be clear with the help of an activity. If we take the raisins and a salt solution or a sugar solution, any solution we can take. So what we require? The raisins, water, sugar or salt solution. And we put the raisins for 2 to 3 hours, and if we allow the water to be soaked, we see that the raisins will be swollen. This is because of endoosmosis. Now, if we take the same raisins and then we put them in a salt or a sugar solution, then we are going to see that the swollen raisins are again going to shrink. This phenomenon is known as the exoosmosis. Now, a simple question. My mother gives me raisins to eat every day. One day, I threw it in a plant pot. Next day, the raisins were bigger in size. Can you tell me why? Yes, you can try. Okay, I'll give you an hint. The hint is endoosmosis. Yes, the raisins were swollen because they absorbed the water which was given to the plants, and what happened? They have absorbed the water, that is why they have swollen. This is a simple example of endoosmosis. Now this was all about the passive type of diffusion, but sometimes the cells have to give energy, because every time the movement is not from the higher concentration towards the lower concentration, and for this the cells require another type of transport, that is the active transport. The transport across the membrane, which requires energy in the form of ATP, is known as the active transport. Now, why does the cell require this type of transport? It requires this type of transport for the movement of glucose, amino acids, some of the ions like calcium, potassium, sodium, which helps in the signaling of the cells, and they are transported across the membrane by the active transport only. This was all about the outer coverings of the cell. In the next class, we are going to discuss about the central part, that is the brain of the cell, the nucleus, as well as the other cell organelles which make up the cell. Thank you.